All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 12:30. After 12:30, we need to get the ball started. Um, how was everybody this afternoon? You okay? Yeah,
Good.
we good. Good to hear. Um, just want to bring us into the present moment in relationship to where we are in the semester, of course. Um, and looking at today's being the last day that we're going to be covering chapter 3, unit 1. Um, we are opening exam up. Number 1 is open already. It was open yesterday, so you might have already gone in and participated in the exam. But it's the exam itself. Had a question on email, I believe, from Ariel, um, about what it's going to cover. It's these 3 chapters plus the excerpt of chapter 5, which overlaps with what we talked about in chapter 2. So that's reflected in our reading schedule. And also want to bring to um, aware that we have our phase 1 due on the 16th, so that'll be next week. That is the reflection paper that we went over earlier in the semester. What else? And don't forget about the exercises that there's the cultural map and the beginning of the semester self-reflection are the I believe the 2 exercises for this for this unit. Like I say, like is indicated in the syllabus and what we talked about, you don't have to do all the exercises in the semester. There's 6 or 7. You only need to do 4 to get full credit for all the exercises. They're not really. Most of them are. Um, most of them are really. There's no wrong answers, but there's. I mean, I'm looking for an effort and to follow what is expected. So, but it's anyway, sort of low hanging fruit type of exercises. Are there any questions about where we stand, exam, and going forward? Okay, I will take silence as golden indication that you are everybody is clear on where we are and what we're doing and what's expected. Um, Please email me if you have any questions after the class, or you can talk to me after class. I'll hang out another minute like I usually do. All right, so where we are today, we are we left off talking about anthropology studying anthropology, the anthropological study of itself. And this, we talked about some of the issues around labeling. Talked about the challenge of overcoming the history of anthropology being a white male sort of discipline where one voice is speaking um, from gender as far as across gender, across age, kind of very much a monologue that is very limited in its scope. To what we would prefer is the polyphonic arrangement of having multiplicity. Everybody experiences culture differently, so everybody has a different interpretation of their culture. And anthropology, we try to encompass as many different voices of understanding and interpretation. Um, and this is we often pursue is what's called the dialogic, where we put voices in relationship to each other. We have inside of our own selves, we have our own voices that we communicate with ourselves against each other sometimes. Like within, that's what I'm asking you to do in that first cultural mapping is you're mapping the different hats that you might wear in one day, and what the relationship is between those two hats. Sometimes your two different hats within your uh, within yourself are talking to each other, and also sometimes in conflict with each other, um, whether it be your social hat, your religious hat. Um, there's sometimes conflict there. Your ethnic identity hat. So anyway, um, that's kind of a tactic within anthropology. So what we need to talk about today, we're gonna go through these 6 steps towards producing ethnography. Remember, ethnography is the primary tool for anthropology to study culture, and it is very much um, the foundation is often interviews, right? So it's got a couple different variations and forms, but primarily ethnography is something that you find in the academic circle, um, and often we as researchers in anthropology will be our mind and our framework will be shaped by a professor, or 2 professors, or a particular department in college, that helps um, to shape your mind and to shape your view of the world and of cultures around the world, and of problems in the world. So you have to choose. Some people will take and choose the culture first as their location of where they want to go study, and then find a problem within that culture that they can then find a way to launch their research into that culture. Some people will pick the problem itself and find a culture that has a relationship to that problem, and go into that culture to try to understand what that relationship is. So this is which this is this is depending upon who you are and what your background is will dictate this. There's no right or wrong way to do that. Um, but you got to choose a site. You got to choose a location, obviously. Um, when I was working on my doctorate, I mean, I had that background in studying the prison system and the criminal justice system for my master's. And then when I went to my PhD, I had professors who were focused on power and the dynamic of power when it comes to um, groups of people who do not have typically a voice. And that's where I came up with this idea. Let's go into a prison where you find people who typically don't have a voice, and have a history sometimes that is not something always, obviously, typically histories of poverty, histories of families being disenfranchised, or not having a father, not having a mother, not having a family at all, coming out of state institutions, juvenile systems. You know, it's they each have a story for how they got into prison, and those stories, to me, we need to pay attention to why people get into prison. So that was a natural location for me to find myself. It was just I listened to throughout the years, through the teachers that I had, and eventually came to my own understanding of the subject matter and my own interest, and there I was in going into prisons. So before you do an ethnographic research, before you go into a culture, you got to understand the culture itself, and you got to do your research. You can't just show up and say, "Hey, I'm ready to put on my prison hat and go into the prison and ask people questions." I had to do a thorough literature review of other research that already happened in prisons. You know, specifically, I wanted to learn, because I was going into San Quentin initially. I wanted to learn what has been studied of San Quentin, that prison culture in itself. So you want to do research. In some situations with anthropologists, they're going to go into a different country altogether, and they're going to have to possibly learn a new language. So acquiring a language is something that is often very common in anthropology, and if you are an anthropology major, some are. It is. I think it's important to learn a language regardless. Let me get that straight. But if you're an anthropology major, I definitely recommend to go ahead and get some experience. And the AAA, the Associates of Arts, requires you to take 2 language courses. The AS does not. So if you're thinking of anthropology in your as a 4-year degree and then potentially a master's or a PhD, I would tend to lean you towards maybe the AAA, where you will have language exposure. But it's not. I went the BS route. So I didn't have language at all, and I got into my doctorate, and I had to take a language exam on Spanish just to get through my PhD program, and it was brutal. It's been since high school since I've been exposed to language. So anyway, so that's a little note on language, important. And also, when you go into another culture and you do not have the language, you have to rely upon interpretation. So I had interpreters when I went to Germany and when I went to Italy to talk to prisoners in those prisons, and I recorded those interviews, and they were I had to rely upon interpreters to help me translate, obviously, and so there was a sense of filter of my questions to them and their answers to me. And that, you want to have a direct lineage of where the information is coming from. You want to have a direct line, and so it somewhat is. Again, it's very helpful to know the language. So there's 2 different sources that you need to be aware of when we talk about comparing cultures, because doing this research, I looked at other countries that had prisons. And tried to find research of other countries to try to do a comparative model. So comparison is something that anthropologists will often do when they go into a culture, to see what other countries are doing in the same fold of what you're interested in. So I wanted to see what people are doing in prisons in other countries. So there's 2 different ways that I have provided here for this course, just to give you a sample of how we might compare cultures. And that is the Hofstede scale and the cross-cultural comparisons. The human relations area file that provides cross-cultural comparisons. So I have these already opened up in browser here, and see if I can find it. So this is important for you, because in your paper, which I'm going to go back into this and we'll revisit this when we start looking at your final phase 3 paper, because you're going to have to find a culture and you're going to have to describe that culture. And this is a great way for you to gain insight to a culture that you've chosen. So this is what we call the Hofstede comparison insights website. Don't know what else to call it. And they don't have a very robust number of countries, but if they do have a country that you're interested in, and mind you, these countries, what's problematic about this is these countries have many different cultures within them. So that's problematic because you're generalizing about these countries. So let's pick, first off, you want to pick United States. Let's go with the US here. Then let's go and pick, you'll see here you have 6 different scales of that's reflecting United States, and power distance, that is in other words, the haves and the have-nots, and the power, the voice of the people who don't have money, the voice of people who do have money, and what the power distance between groups of people. Individualism, that is reflecting as opposed to collectivism. Do we have an individually valued culture versus a collective valued culture? In other words, family, the clan, the group, or the individual. Well, obviously 91 is a very high percentage, which we are a very individually valued country. Masculinity versus being, and this is reflecting sort of a gender dynamic, obviously. 62. Uncertainty and avoidance. These get into the top 3 are what I'm really interested in, but you can go through and look at each of these, and as you see, it kind of gives a breakdown of each of them. If you go down, I believe it's on this page, or maybe you have to click over to the next. Well, it does give a description, so it does break it. It does explain this more, but you can read more about the chosen countries here. Then let's pick Iran. Let's go Iran just to contrast it. Power distance, individualism, masculinity, and then the other 3. So this is one way. Then you can read more about your chosen countries and see what else in more in-depth comparison of the 2. Kind of a quick and easy way to do a comparison. Like I said, there's not a lot of countries. I think it's a few dozen, 40 or so. A more robust source is the HRIF, and this is a database that's a collection from ethnographies that have been done over the years. Pretty deep source, actually. And you can do this, and you can pick a culture that you're interested in. So I've got here typed up Native Americans, and as you can see, there is a collection of Native American ethnographies, and also not just ethnographies, but if you open up, they do a, let's pick, they don't have the Cherokee, but let's pick the Hopi. They have a collective description of each of these cultures, so that it gives a overview of each one. So again, there's a vast. You would really be able to find just about close to almost any culture that you're interested in, or close to. Another way to use this is to go into subjects. So when you browse subjects, if you're interested in finding a culture that has, for example, polygamy. Polygamy is having more than one partner. So you either have polyandry, which is having more than one husband, or polygyny, which is more than one wife. More cultures have more than one wife and more than one husband. It's a very small fraction of cultures that have more than one husband. So what you could do with this is a couple things. You can go in and look at the subject itself, but also you open up related documents, and you'll see these are articles about cultures that have polyandry as their topic, and I mean polygamy, or polyandry or polygamy. So you can go through and find a culture that has that topic embedded in it, and that can be your way to pick your culture that you're pursuing. Any questions about this? So that is, I will open this back up later in the semester, but these are, like I said, these are 2 sources of ways to compare cultures. But But the most preferred way to pursue researching another culture is to do what's called ethnohistorical research, ethnogenesis. You want to be able to trace the culture on its own in its history. These other are comparative tools, and often when you're comparing one polygamous culture against another, you're almost comparing apples and oranges. They might have in common that they have polygamy embedded, but nothing else, very little else. To understand a culture and how they came to have polygamy in their background, you need to research the culture itself. And in this human relations area file actually has some articles that has some of that kind of research. But if you have an option between comparing two cultures to understand a culture versus to research the culture itself and understand the history of that culture, you want to know the history for itself, because that gives you a more deeper understanding of why they are doing what they're doing today. So preliminary research is really important. Next up is to choose a place to land in that culture. And this is an essential, I mean, it can make or break your study if you're going into another culture, because where you land is going to be the entranceway, and it's going to often frame your perspective of that location in that culture. And often, if you are going into there's a long history of anthropologists who rely upon one individual inside that culture to introduce introduce the culture to the anthropologist, and that individual will often be somebody that is got a strong bias, and so they will introduce the anthropologist to only a particular group of people or individuals, and the anthropologist's perspective is tainted from that point on. So that there's a politics. Who can, obviously we're talking about Western anthropologists here who are going into non-Western cultures, and it's very problematic for this power dynamic, and often there's a politicalization within the culture of who can have the closest relationship to the anthropologist. When I was in the prison, I had some of that dynamic, where prisoners who are really hungry to talk to people from the outside, they would do what they would make friends with me, as in a sense almost competitively with other prisoners, so that they could have somebody to talk to and to have an outlet for the outside. So that dynamic is different from culture to culture to culture. But going into the location, wherever you're going to in the culture, who you are and your gender identity is something that has always played a big impact. There's of course a history of in which it was a male anthropologist that was always involved, and so it was typically men who they spoke to when they went into the culture. When women started getting into the business of anthropology, had anthropologists like Margaret Mead and Ruth Benedict. Those are some 1960s, 1950s. They were some students of Boaz, and they actually both of them had like Margaret Mead here. She got married to another anthropologist, Gregory Bateman, and they worked together. They went into cultures as a team, so that the men could talk to Gregory and Margaret could talk to the women. So that dynamic is something you really sometimes can't control, because you're going into the culture and that culture has a orientation towards gender, and it's often there's some segregation involved in some cases. Any questions about this, please? So the fourth step is when you arrive and you have your location. How many people have actually traveled into another culture, travel the world and out of the United States?
I have.
Did
Well,
you did you experience any culture shock if you did?
absolutely. I backpacked through UK. It was just interesting, like that their culture that is so similar, yet there's a lot of differences in the expectations of females in primarily in like Britain or versus Wales, even though they're super close. But then and in Mexico, spent a lot of time in Mexico. Is It's wild how even just the economic disparity between us and them. My family that I have there that are up, wealthier, um, but yet still live in such a distinct. I couldn't wear shorts there, by the way, like
Mhm.
with my family,
Yeah.
just for showing my legs. So that was interesting.
Yeah. So the dynamic of the different expectations of gender, but often it is language that's a big barrier, um, and causes a sense um, of isolation, and anthropologists experience loneliness deeply for sometimes the entire time while they're in the culture. Samantha says, I lived in Japan for a while when I was married. Yeah, not knowing what you should do and not do. And it's really like going to the store, doing the simple aspects of life was the most challenging thing to me. Um, and going to the store and not being able to, not knowing if I'm doing the right thing and how I speak to folks. It's so there's this culture shock, and it's something that takes a while to overcome, um, and then you finally find your feet in the culture and you start to live it a little bit, and but then you have to return back. So there's this W effect that happens with anthropologists. You go in, you get this sort of cultural high. And getting immersed into another world, and then you realize you're going to have to return back home, and there's this sort of drop, and you sort of go into this sort of depressive area of going back to home, and there's another culture shock of returning back to your home reality. Um, so yeah, it's a little bit of an up and down roller coaster to say the least. But you write about this as part of your writing can be reflecting on this experience. Um, yeah. Samantha says after about a week of trying to explore, I just hit on base for the rest of my time there. Yeah, I self quarantined too. I was quarantining myself off into my little. I had a little cottage in the south of Italy, and I sort of in Italy, it's such a social world, and you kind of have to engage, you have to be, or else just think something's wrong with you. But yeah, it's you definitely can't hide. You can't hide if you want to be an anthropologist. You gotta throw yourself out there and get over your fears, and really being humble and being willing to try to speak and try to engage. Typically, that's the key to overcoming, to developing friends and to getting insight, help, and to getting allies within your research. It's just reaching out. Um, so number five, you're there. You've got a place to live. You're overcome your shock, and you're needing to talk to people, and so here we go. Got to go get information, and gathering data comes in two different forms. Qualitative is the kind of stuff you get when you interview a group of people, and you sit down and you have um, uh, life stories told to you, and that's their interpretation of their reality. That's qualitative. Quantitative is the demographics. It's the kind of anything that you can compile in numbers, right? How many men, how many women, how many children, the ages, etc. How many different people in ethnic groups. It is like I said, it is something you can add up, and the two work together. You need both. You need quality. You need this subjective world of the qualitative, and you need the quantifiable. You need to have back your subjective interpretations with numbers and quantities. So in these interviews, you're going to do informal and formal. Informal meaning that you have sometimes improvised conversations that you didn't plan. Those are sometimes the richest and juiciest sources of information, actually, versus the structured formal ones where I had a set of 5 or 6 questions that a script basically that I asked every prisoner so that I could keep it consistent, the information coming to me consistent. And those questions help organize the themes of what I'm going to write about when I go home. So this is important to have both. They both are valuable, and you don't know which is going to play out the most importance. Number 6 is interpreting and reporting, and this is as far as this is the hard work to me. This was the hard work. You've done all this great research, and you've been out exploring the field, and you're now going down back into sort of the low part of a W effect, because you sit there with your information. You got to write a document, and you got to interpret it. You build themes, and you find something that you find sort of organization to hundreds and sometimes thousands of pages of notes, and this is the challenge. This was the hardest thing. It took me 3 years to write my dissertation after I got back from the field. It's been about 2 years researching, a year and a half researching out in prisons and out in other countries, and then I came back and sat with it for 3 years, and it was mentally a very difficult thing to do. But that is in essence the summary, a short summary of what happens when you do research. Now, underlying all of this is we have to worry about is ethics. In this documentary, we're going to watch some of. It looks like we're not going to watch all of it, but we'll watch most of it and then talk about it. There's some ethical issues with this documentary, and the American Anthropological Association has their own code of ethics, and the core of the ethics, I have it broken down, is this: when you are studying other cultures, the first primary thing is that your ethical duty is more important than the information that you're gathering. So if you need to compromise information, then you'd rather compromise information and instead of exploiting the people that are helping you with that information. So your primary duty is to respect and ethically take care of the information that you're pulling out. Do no harm. You intend to not influence and change the cultures which you're studying. And very importantly is you always let people know what you're doing. You're not in secret disguise. They know who you are. They know your intention. And sometimes I got informed consent from each of the prisoners that I interviewed to interview them. So it's very similar to what a psychologist would be with a client. There's no hidden agenda, and that's key. Also, the big question is, and something of debate among that anthropologists, is what is our responsibility to the people that we're studying with? what's the responsibility? Do we owe them something after we're done? Well, I tried to include a couple prisoners in the editing process of my document. It's difficult. Every population, every culture that anthropologists engage with has a different relationship and a different dynamic. And but what do you owe? Do you owe them, if you make money off your study, do you owe them a piece of that pie? So anyway, are there any questions? So this documentary, A Man Called B, ask you to, in watching this documentary, and I'm going to show probably 25 or 30 minutes of it, then we'll talk briefly about it. You will see him developing a relationship, and so look at how did he develop a relationship. How was Napoleon Chagnon's overall goal in his study? And what was his mission? And you really, last bit is something that I'll probably have to fast forward to it, but it's at the end he says, these may be the last people to whom we can glimpse dimly into our past. What's the nature of that statement? So three primary things that I want you to look at. Also be aware of what's the difference between this documentary and the documentary that we saw with the Navajo. You'll be able to tell that pretty quick. So how did he develop a relationship to the Yanomami? What was his overall goal and mission in what he was pursuing? Okay, so I will start the clip, and hopefully we won't have any technical issues this time. You can't hear that, can you?
No.
Okay. It's not letting me share the sound for some reason. Of course, there's going to be a technical problem. We don't have much time. Let's see something.
Of Venezuela and Brazil presently number The Yanomami Indians of Venezuela and Brazil presently number 15,000 people.
Y'all hear that okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks.
Living in some 150 villages that are scattered over a vast tropical forest. During the past 100 years, the Yanomami have expanded in all directions from the Sierra Parima, a chain of low-lying forested hills that forms the backbone of the tribal distribution. This expansion is still going on today, continuing a process of micro-political evolution. This evolution has led to linguistic, demographic, and organizational differences in the large blocks of villages that comprise the entire tribe. In the central and southwestern areas, villages are very large, warfare is intense, and social organization is more complex than in other regions. In the southwest, the Shamatari population block is typical. Their original villages grew to about 150 people and fissioned to produce two new villages that entered into wars with each other, moving further and further apart, penetrating new lands. These villages in turn grew, fissioned, and entered into wars among themselves and with their neighbors. Today, there are about a dozen villages in the Shamatari cluster, all descended by fissioning and population growth from a single village. During the past 8 years, I have spent a total of 36 months among the Yanomama, collecting anthropological data that describe and explain this process of growth and fissioning. Much of that time was spent in the village of Mishimishima-Buetede, one of the larger Shamatari villages, some 275 people in total. In 1968, against the advice of my friends in the village of Bishasatedi, I ascended the Mavaka River and contacted the Mishimishima-Buetede, who had never before seen foreigners. The Bishasatedi, mortal enemies of the Mishimishima-Buetede, were certain that they would kill me on the spot, or that lahalas, fabulous water serpents, would rise up out of the river and devour me. I survived both these hazards and returned to visit the Mishimishima-Buetede every year until 1972. When I first went to live with the Yanomama, they wanted to know my name. I told them that it was Shagnon, or Chagnon, but they couldn't pronounce it. It sounded to them like their name for a pesky bee, Shanki, and that is what they decided to call me. To the Yanomama, I am the man called Bee. Visitors are supposed to recline with poise. Nanokawa, one of the hosts, grows impatient with his own customs and excitedly tries to converse with me.
Is it frozen? Better now?
It was better there for a second, but yeah, it would freeze like occasionally.
Okay, I'm gonna turn my video off. That sometimes helps.
Me. He is a leader in his own village, which broke away from Mishimishima-Buetede recently. He has temporarily moved back into Mishimishima-Buetede at the insistence of his several brothers-in-law. He and the local headman are closely related in the male line and do not get along well. They are competitors for women and leadership.
Frozen again.
Yes.
Okay, hold on. close a bunch of windows. I don't know if that's going to have any problem issue with it, but it's worth a try.
It was doing pretty good there for a minute.
Got on a roll. Okay, let's see if we can try it again. Fine.
I reciprocate the continuing goodwill of the people with goods and services. They have grown to trust me and to recognize the effectiveness of the medicines I always bring for them. They expect me to cure the perennial eye infections of the children and babies, and although their language has no words for thank you, they can express their appreciation in other ways. A smile, a click of the tongue, or a gift of food. Wadoshewa and his brothers are an important faction in the village. No gift is unencumbered, and as he presents me with a basket of smoked meat and peach palm fruit, he whispers, my possessions are more important to the Mishmishima Buiteri than my services, and we always exchange items. I do not really want the bows, arrows, spun cotton, and other things they offer me, but I cannot do my work without providing them with fish hooks, fish line, machetes.
Okay. It's like there is a lot of problem with the streaming. Okay, what we'll do is I'm going to have y'all watch this on your own. And I will post a, think how to do this. I want you to watch it on your own, and I will post a, why don't we do this? I'll let you watch it on. We'll talk about it on Tuesday to start the class off with, and I'll extend the exam by 2 more days after that, so that we have a chance to talk about it. So
are these documentaries on the exam?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. The documentaries that I show in full length in class, absolutely. So if I show a substantial amount of a documentary, for sure, and I was going to show at least half of this one, but this is a great teaching documentary, and yeah, I think that'll be. We'll just need about 10-15 minutes to talk about it at the beginning of the next class, and then we'll get into chapter 4 with language. Okay. Any questions? I'm sorry about that. It's, I got to check with my administrators to see if there's anything I can do to help this matter, because this is happening with every documentary that I'm showing, and if we need to just change the format where I'll have you watch the documentary at home from now on. My only problem with that is that I've tried that in the past. I tried that last semester, and a lot of folks aren't watching the documentaries, and then they don't do well on the exam. So so please do yourself a service as a student and watch the documentary. It's only 40 minutes long, and we'll look and see what we're going to do with the other documentaries. So all right. So yeah, I wish could you play it on like a TV behind you? Yeah, that's wishful thinking. um, all right. Any other questions or comments? Anything that anybody else wants to? You're welcome to go ahead and watch the documentary. There's on eLearn, when you go on to eLearn, that those questions that I just showed you. Let me show you where they all live. So each chapter, you see, chapter 2 has the documentary. Underneath, you got to go into videos for the documentaries, but you have the viewer guide for Seasons of Navajo. Those are the potential questions. The study guide for each of these chapters is also available, but the viewer guide for this documentary is this guy right here, and if you open it up, it has those exact same questions that I just outlined on the Prezi. Oh, that's the link for the documentary. Let me see. So here they are. So and they give basically the outline of the discussion we're going to have on Tuesday next week about it. So there's a little bit more questions on this than are necessary. Also, for the exam, you should just, I've shown this before at the beginning of the semester, but let's remind you of where the potential essay questions are on the exam. Here's Unit 1, so this is Unit 1 module. Underneath resource links, you have possible exam essay questions. And if you open that up, you'll see that the most important questions that I have here are these two right here about the documentary. So you'll know that at least one of these two questions will be on the exam. I typically have 3 essay questions, sometimes 4 on the exam. And I say essay, they're not long form, they're short form essays. So a long, strong paragraph could capture what I'm looking for. It's not about length, it's about content of what you're saying. But like I said at the beginning of the semester, you'll have, if you have 4 on an exam, you only have to answer 3. If you have 3, you only have to answer 2. But I give like I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 essay options here, possibilities here. There'll be a collection of these on the exam. So if you study these questions, you'll be studying for the exam, to say the least. And if I don't ask them in the exam, if I don't ask these questions, then somewhere in the multiple choice true false questions, you'll find them kind of part of the questioning in that realm. So it's a good, but the study guides for each of these chapters are really valuable, I think, for studying for your exams. If you go into chapter 1, you have your study guide here, excuse me, that you can use, and the PowerPoint and the Prezi link as well. So, any questions?
So we're going to get the exam extended by 2 days, so that means it'll be on Tuesday that it'll be due.
Let me open up the assessment here. Exam number 1 is set for ending on the 15th. So that was going to be ending before the next class, right? So which I think is actually the 15th. So it would be, so what I'll do is I'll set that for, do it right now while I'm thinking of it. I'll set that for the, so it was going to be on the 15th. I'll set that for the 18th. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for being flexible and bearing with the technology. So,
Howard has to
yeah,
be
what's that?
throughout COVID and everything else. We all have had to be so flexible, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's what we're all learning. I think it's kind of the equation for sanity is flexibility. So, all right, well, y'all have a great weekend, and we will pick up here on Tuesday next week. So, have a great day, and enjoy the rain. Be safe. I'll hang out for another minute if anybody needs to talk. Um, the essay answers, Amethyst, that is, I don't have any preset, like I said, they're not long version essay questions. They're short version. They're, so a good strong paragraph will be sufficient. Yeah, they're not meant to be like three paragraphs for sure. That's I'm looking for kind of concise and to the point. Any other questions? All right.